Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to thank you for your invitation. We see each other after a year, and we will have an opportunity to discuss European agriculture. After agreement with the organizer, I have prepared a statement on the topic of sustainability, because sustainability is actually discussed all the times in all contexts and relationship, but also in connection with environment and agriculture. I would like to say that the previous speaker mentioned that before in greater detail. So what we heard was that there's some kind of European strategy here, that there's a European objective of climate neutrality. And actually following up to that are other strategies that relate to agriculture, but not only agriculture. We, as the Agricultural Association, see the notion of sustainability not only through the prisma of the environment, as it is very modern today, but we see it in a more complex way, not only through environment, but also social and economic sustainability, since we are convinced that one cannot do without the other. So it is not possible to ignore the economic impacts in the context of climate neutrality, because this will be reflected in social unrest, and ultimately there won't be any climate neutrality. Quite at the beginning, I'd like to say that we as farmers understand that something is happening about our planet, that experts speak about the need for responding to climate change and do maximum for mitigating the impacts of climate change. And we also say that we have to adapt to climate change, because it is not possible to concentrate just to doing what we can for the climate change not happening, because you yourselves can see the political consequences. And a few weeks ago there was a conference in Glasgow where it was quite clear that some countries did not share the common goals towards climate neutrality, and that it would be very difficult to achieve what had been actually set as a target in terms of climate neutrality by the year 2050. Let me say that we are in a situation of respecting that the European Union and our political leaders have entered upon an agreement, and we are ready to be engaged in that agreement. But we also see and respect climate experts here, and we can nothing but respect their opinions, but we want experts in some other fields respect the views of farmers, and we have a feeling that this is not happening. We have a feeling that this is about us without us. Here are some figures I referred to last year, just with a small addition that the greenhouse gas emissions are created by agriculture at the level of 23% globally, but it's just under 10% in Europe. It shows itself that European agriculture is one which has a lower impact on climate change, on the carbon burden, which is a very important thing in the context of what was said partly by the previous speakers, but also of what we talk about, that is fulfillment of the Green Deal and farm-to-fork and biodiversity strategies. I'd like to say that in comparison with the outside world, the Czech economy, Czech agriculture, in comparison with the EU, is a better off, is in a better situation, because since 1990 we have been able to reduce President Janecek mentioned that in relation of reducing livestock levels, etc. So we have made significant reductions of CO2 emissions in agriculture since 1990 by 48%. And I say again, and I follow up to what was said by the previous speaker, that each and every country has a different starting line. And we can't ignore these things, and we can't pretend that we will make a start today and all of us will reduce by same percentages, etc., because in fact, we have done our part of work, and so we do not actually defend ourselves against taking additional measures, but it means that we have been able to reduce, to transfer the burdens to farmers in the past periods. In other words, there is a 7% share in those effects by the Czech Republic. I'd like to say that I have one big problem in the context of looking at the farm-to-form strategy and biodiversity strategies, because these strategies refer to some objectives, goals. I mean, reducing pesticides, fertilizers, agriculture area, out of production areas of soil, and these are referred to as goals. I'm convinced that these are not goals or objectives, because in reality these goals are supposed to achieve something. So it cannot be achieved to reduce pesticides, because this does not bring any benefits by itself. If somebody says that we should reduce pesticides, they must tell us what we want to achieve, reducing the burden on waters by pesticide residues, or attenuating the development of biodiversity. Let's say that the objective is to reduce the pesticide residues in waters, or biodiversity problems, or reducing greenhouse gases. But let's not mistake tools for objectives. And these are some tools that have been presenting to us by someone, and as a fact, and it was actually, as it was mentioned here before, but nobody actually discussed this with us. And what is worse about this is that we close our eyes to potential impacts of those tools rather than objectives or goals. I'd like to say that we as farmers are very sorry about this. We are bothered by this. I'm not going to repeat all the impact studies, not only USDA, the JRC, Wageningen, Kiel, Oxfam report, many others, many other agricultural organizations set their own goals. I'd like to say that we are in a situation that what we want actually from the European Commission, have wanted from the European Commission for more than a year, then designing, drafting real impact studies, taking into account all the agricultural, all the farmers' objectives, and what this will bring about, what the costs and benefits will be out of those strategies, and then say whether these goals or tools are properly set or not. Because we are in a situation when our lack of certainty and apprehensions are strengthened also by the behavior of the European Commission. The Commission pushes with force those goals, and even the study JRC results. And even last January, actually, the Commission knew about those goals and had a trialogue taking place. It didn't say European Parliament or other representatives of the EU countries what kind of studies it followed. So we suspect that actually about putting through those goals with the objectives of making some secrecy. And only after the concluding of the trialogue discussion, the JRC studies will be published. So it's not a comprehensive study, they would like to say, perhaps. I personally must say that such a behavior on part of the Commission evokes suspicions of efforts or about the trialogue, European trialogue, mistrust in the eyes of farmers and also representatives of the European Parliament and Council, and actually it does not contribute to kind of a common agreement about common targets. I would like to say that last week that the European Parliament actioned the conclusions of the trialogue, and we sent a request to our MPs in the European Parliament to not to support some of the things included there, but at the time that the report on farm to fork strategy was discussed, we also requested most of our European Parliament members saying that actually some of those targets raise suspicions about the truthfulness. Do not support it. Do let us impact studies created, because it's not it's not possible to do such things hastily. But we were attacked by environmental organizations that we were against the support of environment, that we want to actually sweep from the table the farm to fork strategy and others. And we also witnessed that the studies listed here were called into questions as deliberate, as lacking objective purposes, studies that were just aimed at actually approving our position. We have not been saying all the time not anything else that the European Union should actually work out the strategies, and actually those impact studies, if they did so, we could have had those impact studies, say, about a year ago, and we could have a discussion whether they were set appropriately, but the substantial is that nothing like that happened. The Commission has been defending its position against this, and when we talk about how to substitute for the role of the Commissions, we are actually accused of lack of objectivity. At the same time, the environmental organizations have not come up with their own studies. They just question our studies, the studies that we have made, like Kopa Kužek in cooperation with Wageningen University, and we do it because, unlike those environmental organizations, we will bear responsibility. We will be the ones to implement the recommendations, and we will carry the burden of economic and social impacts, not the environmental organization. They bear no responsibility. I do not want to call into question their right to defend their views. It's quite all right. But discussion within the democratic process is very important. But we are those farmers who will have to implement that and who will pay for that ultimately. And we are right that our opinion in the process be respected and be taken into question, which is not happening and which, of course, triggers our resistance and our negative reactions. I'm not going to go through all the individual studies because our colleagues have talked about them. What is important is that everybody can find them in the open public space on the internet, and you will get simple summaries in the presentations which will be available to download. In other words, let me sum up what the previous speaker said. All those studies basically confirm the same results, though there are some differences. What we are expected to do is to implement measures that will increase the costs of farmers, reduce their production, worsen their competitiveness on the world market. We will be in a situation when tension will be created on the global markets, and which will deepen isolationism. Threat is of trade wars with some countries. The U.S. Department of Agriculture expressed itself clearly that some carbon blocking on the borders and some other requirements of the commissions are acceptable to them and will lead to an actual response from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And also there will be some other reactions, like increase of the prices of foodstuffs. And it's a question whether the purchasing power in Middle and East are affordable. Let's see what has happened on the market with gas and electricity, and we will add growth of the food prices. Of course, worsen will be the economy of farmers, and it will also trigger social economic injustice in the society. And in final result, it can mean also a breakdown of the EU as a whole. And all that, of course, entails that about 1,000 farmers a day, Wojciechowski said, actually go broke because they are not able to withstand the economic pressure. And once we make all those steps, there will not be 1,000 of them, there will be many more, because we do not add in the framework of the common European budget, but we will just actually pushing this on their shoulders. And if they are not able to reflect it in the prices of their products, they will not be able to withstand that pressure economically. What is important here is that all this should bring some environmental effect. And now there's a question whether the real environmental effect will be achieved. And that's important, because if we can rest assured that this will really happen, that will be carbon neutral, and that we will improve the environment in Europe and or globally, then of course we can have a dialogue across the whole society. But there are very serious doubts here that what is presented to us as a goal will be really materialized. And some of the study results speak about that, because they say that if Europe reduces the production of foodstuff, and I say again, Europe produces foodstuff with the lowest carbon footprint among all those continents. It means that if the continent or community which produces foodstuffs with the lowest carbon footprint reduces its production, then it's quite logical when there's a growing demand for foodstuffs in the whole, the demand will not disappear. It will stay with us. It will be covered by someone else or met by someone, by a farmer from Latin America, by a farmer from Asia, and it will be covered with a higher carbon footprint than what the European foodstuffs have. In other words, and some of the study results confirm this, there is a very serious threat that we will not improve globally CO2 emissions from agriculture, but the other way around. We maybe even worsen the situation. So in other words, where we are best, we will reduce it, and we will shift it to where it is not done as well. I mean, well, in the context of global climate as such. From the manager's point of view, it's a stupid strategy. And of course, we as farmers attack these things. And now about how we see it. When I go back to the ecological, environmental sustainability, we are convinced that if we want to improve the quality of the environment in Czech Republic and in Europe, we can't go the path of prohibiting farmers to use arable land, but we will tell that by telling them that you will allocate 10% of your soils for non-production. That must be an individual matter of each and every farmer according to the farmer's conditions. whether they have a very good quality soil. So perhaps the best quality soil in Hane region will not be covered by grass and landscape elements, and then grow foodstuffs in the mountains where there are more landscape elements. You can't actually just say 10% like technocratic. It shows in itself how bad the strategy is when we try to solve this without any regard to specific farmers' conditions. Question of soil quality is a question of organic matter. Organic matter is able to retain water inside, and of course improves the quality soil, and also better coupling of the carbon gases, and these are metals, so variable agriculture applications, etc. And water, if you want to reduce the chemical residues in waters, then let's do what the Minister of Agriculture proposes, reducing pesticides in a protected zone of water economy. But we have to go to the farmer and say, we will do something what we will reduce your yields, but we have to compensate this for you. You can't just push this on the shoulders of agriculture and say they should pay it. It would be selfish towards the agriculture. The question of carbon neutrality, again, new technologies. We can't just say we will not use manures, we will fertilizers, we will not spray manures. It's not a way to go forward, because it leads to lower yields. To feed the same quantity of people with lower production, I have to sow on a bigger size of land. Like milk cows, they produce more carbon, greenhouse carbons, those that do 5,000 than just one. The way of reducing production, the way of reduction is very dangerous. It's not very well thought of with regard to biodiversity. It is true, of course, that biodiversity development for us farmers is very important and sensitive, because we see that biodiversity is lowering down in landscape, and we have to try to find ways of improving the situation. But it's not possible to do it by saying to farmers, you will not use fertilizers, manures, spraying, breed cattle, animals, etc. So there's no question in the discussion of actually making new construction projects of arable or agricultural soil. But on concrete pavement of parking lots, there will hardly be some biodiversity. There's no discussion about it, and nobody says that Europe or Czech Republic should define strategic quantities of agricultural soil which will not be allowed ever for construction projects, because we need to feed our own population, but there's no discussion about it. There's also a question of landmark elements, and somebody tries to tell us you will have that many landmark elements, but you need to create landmark elements on the basis of technographical division of blocks 10 to 30, and we will have yield plans, and knowing that we will have, I have a piece of land on this, in this area where the yields are never high, and I can afford to create a landmark element, or in the sense of some biocorridors, rather than technocratically order farmers that each of you must have some percentage of landmark elements. It's easy, maybe easy in terms of administration, but otherwise it's a stupid solution. Animal welfare, efficient use of sources is what I mentioned already. And now, what is not much discussed, that is economic sustainability. We are convinced that if we want to have economically sustainable agricultural management, there must be equal conditions for all farmers. We create dividing lines all the time between individual EU member states inside them, redistributive payments, support environmental, non-ecological, etc. But we actually single out and the importance of the markets. If I want to order something that somebody has 20, 25, 30% of soil in the regime of environmental friendly agriculture, and I do not resolve whether the population of that state is able to buy and pay for those foodstuffs, I ignore the importance of the market. We had something like that before. We were produced what the market did not want, and we were not able to produce what the market wanted. It's not possible to determine that by political decisions. We want to be guided by what the population says. If the population wants bio food, we have to produce it. It's always demand and supply. But if there is no demand, we can't generate supply. Of course, economical. This would be a suicidal strategy, which we can maintain only as long as we are able, at the expense of creating debts for EU member states, to save, to rescue efficient compensations. And once we are not able to do that, everything will break down, but we will lose the competitiveness. In the meantime, we will lose farmers, and we will lose capacities, which will be bad. Very important things which we see here is support of local economy. It is interesting that when we talk about wanting to produce some foodstuffs in this country so that they need not be imported from the the corners of the world or the second part of Europe, there always a discussion stirred up here about the fair market positions, etc. When we say that we should close some capacities in some other parts of the world because of their economic non-efficiency, there is no discussion about that. We want to support our farmers in not having to import foodstuff. We want them to get them to our supermarket. We talk about free market. We talk about equal conditions, and we are prohibited from saying the supermarket do not want to sell bio foodstuffs, etc. It's not a fair approach. And I'm getting to conclusion. I'm getting to the end of my presentation. It's a question about how to implement the Green Deal. I'm convinced that we, through the Green Deal, may not return to agriculture which existed here some 150, 200 years ago. We have to go forward. We have to use new technologies. Research results, we cannot pretend that we do not want to use new technologies because the whole world is using them. Of course, we can't ignore the results of research in relation to new preparations for the protection of plants and other things. I'm convinced, and it was mentioned in discussion in EU Parliament, that the farmers must invest to the new technologies. And let's say that the European agricultural share European economy is not. We reduce the income, we increase the cost of farmers, and we want them to produce more. This runs counter to each other. We have to do our best for teaching as many farmers as possible to use new technologies like digitalization, etc., because they in itself are less burden for the environment. And the very last thing, which is connected with this, that Europe must maintain food production. I do not agree with a philosophy that will reduce the cow stock in Europe because they increase the carbon, actual green gas, because if the European cows do not do it, the American cows will do it, Latin American, but very last thing which I want to do is social sustainability, which is As we see it, the Agricultural Union, what is missing here is social contract. We function in a way that some European authorities present some strategies to us, forcing us to implement them. On the one hand, they communicate sufficiently with the farmers to implement them, but they show to the public insufficiently, I have a feeling, that they actually keep secrecy about the impacts before the public, so that the public is not against by chance. But it's not possible to do. If you want to achieve something, we have to have an agreement of the whole society. People agree that the living standards will slow down, that the prices of foodstuff, fuels, energy, etc. will be more expensive. Everything will get more expensive, and if most of the society democratically agree upon this, then it's all right. But we can't achieve this by hiding here something, ignore something, and present some resultative dictatorship-like things or pushing things by force. I think that is bad. We, as the Agricultural Union, are convinced that we have to have discussion about those things, and the public must be aware of the impacts, because without that, the result will be that the society will be against. At the time, it will be surprised and astonished by those impacts that can result in political instability, unrest. You can see in France the vests rallies, actually, etc., demonstration in Europe, etc. None of us will want this. Then what we also need is educating the public, educating the farmers. But these are things that are more or less clear. The very last thing I'd like to mention, I have been talking the whole time about sustainability to European politicians, in connection to European politicians. But there is one more form of sustainability relating to us farmers as well, and that is company or corporate sustainability, or professionally ESG as social sustainability of companies and communities. It is in the context of taxonomy and other things, according to PBC study from 2020, global average 25 companies in the Czech Republic do this, only 7% in Czech Republic. I think that we still have a great debt here, and personally, we are convinced as farmers that it's necessary for us to actually take care about certification of farmers. We are not afraid as farmers in the Czech Republic to be worse than those in some other countries. And we are convinced that we should really relevantly, on the basis of professional expert approaches, to deal with this system as well, to be guaranteed by the Ministry of Agriculture, declare that the foodstuffs. I am finally at the end of my presentation, that these foodstuffs are produced with regard to with respect to environment. Last slide, in conclusion, is just a summary of what I said already. I will use just the last sentence that I borrowed from my colleague, the president of the German Agricultural Union, who stated towards the public, towards the environmental organization, and towards politicians, towards the Commission, do not actually deal about us, but deal with us, farmers, because we will be those to implement the strategy. We will carry the burdens. We will carry the cost. Don't ignore our warning voices. Thank you very much.
Question: how long would it take before Europe would reflect the negative impacts of Green Deal Well, I don't know, of course. I hope it will happen quickly. Well, I don't want to suggest that we, as farmers, refuse everything, that we don't want to promote sustainability of farming. No, it is not like that. We are rejecting approach that ignores our opinions. We ignore approach when somebody creates studies that may have negative impact on agriculture and also on the environment and finally on society. And they don't want to hear those impacts and they don't want to develop the impact study. This is not an acceptable method. We think we should be more responsible, maybe slower, but more careful. My teacher at the elementary school was explaining me think twice, and I think we are not thinking twice before we act, and this is not good. Thank you very much. It's not us, it's them. Well, for Mr. Pýcha, due to a Green Deal, the economy will be harmed. Mainly in agriculture, how long it will take to rectify it? Well, of course, it's the question. Well, would we lose the export share? Would we decrease the livestock numbers once we liquidate the livestock breeds? Well, that will never recover. It happened with pork. We closed down the pigs breeding. We fired experts, and it is difficult or quite impossible to recover the situation. Then it's like that and strategy. And we can see that it is happening in agriculture, for instance, pork, or we can talk about vegetable. You know how vegetable production dropped in the Czech Republic.
And there was a question to Mr. Pýcha. What interest on part of consumers do you expect in the Czech Republic as far as consumption of the small insect is concerned? Of course, in Europe, there is no tradition of consuming locusts like insects. I don't expect there will not be great demand on part of consumers for this. But as far as the locust breeding makes sense economically, so if they mince it and include it in your hash meat, you will not recognize what you eat. It will actually, we will not have a feeling that we consume locusts. We will feel that we consume beef, but it can be meatballs with locusts. But I don't think that actually there will be some greater demand for insect eating in this country in future.